You don't have what it takes to play at this level." Coach Reynolds sneered as he crossed Marcus Washington's name off the starting lineup for the third consecutive game. "Maybe you should focus on your books instead of pretending you belong on this court." The 20 other players in that University of Kentucky locker room fell silent, but the message was clear. Being the most talented player on the team meant nothing if you were black, and the coach had already decided your fate. That moment in 1994 didn't just end Marcus Washington's college basketball dreams. It ignited a fire that would burn for the next 30 years. What Coach Tom Reynolds couldn't have known was that the young man he was humiliating would one day sign the checks that determined whether coaches like him kept their jobs. This is the story of how racial bias in college sports created one of the most successful black sports executives in American history, and how systematic discrimination became the catalyst for revolutionary change in professional athletics. It's about the hidden prejudices that still plague college basketball, where over 50% of players are black, but coaches and administrators remain overwhelmingly white. And what happens when extraordinary talent refuses to be silenced by small-minded bigotry. Marcus Washington's journey from benchwarmer to NBA team owner represents more than just personal triumph. It's a blueprint for how economic empowerment can transform entire industries. When he walked back into that Kentucky locker room 30 years later as the new owner of the franchise, he carried with him not just legal ownership documents, but the power to ensure that no talented athlete would ever again be diminished by the prejudices that had once nearly destroyed his own dreams. The boy who was told he didn't belong on the court would eventually decide who got to coach on it, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't proving them right. It's buying the building and changing the rules. Marcus Washington grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, in the Smoketown neighborhood, a historically black community that had produced some of the city's greatest athletes, from boxer Muhammad Ali to countless basketball stars who had gone on to college and professional success. His father, James Washington, was a steelworker at the Ford plant who had played semi-professional basketball in the Negro Leagues-era circuits before integration opened new opportunities for black athletes. His mother, Dorothy, worked as a seamstress and instilled in Marcus both the discipline to excel academically and the confidence to pursue his basketball dreams without compromise. The late 1980s and early 1990s were a complex time for black athletes in Kentucky. The state's basketball programs were experiencing the benefits of integration. Talented black players were helping schools like Kentucky and Louisville achieve national prominence, but the power structures remained largely unchanged. Coaching staffs, athletic directors, and university administrators were predominantly white, creating environments where talented black athletes could be simultaneously celebrated and marginalized. Marcus showed exceptional basketball talent from elementary school, leading every team he joined to championships while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. That would make him attractive to top universities. By his senior year at Central High School, he was averaging 32 points, 12 rebounds, and 8 assists per game, leading his team to the state championship and earning recognition as Kentucky's Player of the Year. College scouts from across the nation courted him, but Marcus's dream was to play for the University of Kentucky, the program he had followed since childhood. The recruitment process revealed early warning signs of the discrimination Marcus would later face. While coaches praised his athletic abilities, several made comments that seemed to question his character and work ethic in ways that his white teammates never experienced. "He's got talent, but we'll need to make sure he fits our program's culture," one assistant coach told Marcus's high school coach, using coded language that black athletes and their families had learned to recognize as potentially problematic. Marcus chose Kentucky anyway, believing that his performance on the court would speak louder than any prejudices in the coaching staff. The university's basketball program was entering the modern era of college athletics, where television revenues and corporate sponsorships were creating million-dollar budgets and national exposure. Black athletes were essential to this success. They comprised the majority of players on the most competitive teams, yet they often found themselves excluded from leadership roles and decision-making processes that affected their own careers. Coach Tom Reynolds had been hired in 1991 with a mandate to restore Kentucky's basketball program to national championship caliber. A former player at Duke University, Reynolds brought with him a coaching philosophy that emphasized what he called fundamentals and discipline, but which many observers recognized as coded language for a style of play that favored white players and marginalized the creative, athletic approach that many black players brought to the game. The cultural dynamics of the Kentucky basketball program reflected broader patterns of racial discrimination in college sports. While black athletes generated millions in revenue through their performances, they faced systematic exclusion from positions of authority within athletic departments, coaching positions, administrative roles, and even team captain positions were disproportionately held by white individuals, creating environments where talented black players could excel athletically while being denied opportunities for leadership development. Marcus entered the university in 1993 as one of the most highly recruited players in the country, but he quickly discovered that his high school success meant little in an environment where coaches had already formed opinions about his potential based on factors that had nothing to do with basketball ability. During his freshman year, he noticed patterns in how Coach Reynolds distributed playing time, assigned positions, and provided feedback that seemed to correlate more with players' race than with their performance in practice or games. The academic expectations placed on Marcus and other black players were also different from those applied to white teammates. While all student athletes were required to maintain minimum academic standards, black players faced additional scrutiny and criticism when their performance in non-revenue sports or general education classes didn't meet coaches' expectations. Marcus, who was pursuing a degree in business administration and maintaining a 3.6 GPA, often heard comments about staying focused on academics that his white teammates with lower grades never received by his sophomore year. Marcus had begun to understand that his college basketball experience would be shaped as much by racial dynamics as by athletic performance. The stage was set for the confrontation that would define both his immediate future and his long-term approach to addressing discrimination in sports. The defining moment came during the fourth game of Marcus Washington's sophomore season, following what should have been his breakout performance as a Kentucky Wildcat. The team was facing Duke University coach Reynolds' alma mater in a nationally televised game that would determine early rankings and NCAA tournament positioning. Marcus had been the team's leading scorer through the first 3 games of the season, averaging 28 points while shooting 52% from the field and leading the team in assists and steals. In the days leading up to the Duke game, Marcus noticed unusual patterns in Coach Reynolds' behavior. During film sessions, Reynolds focused extensively on Duke's defensive strategies, while spending minimal time preparing the Kentucky offense for opportunities that Marcus's driving ability and court vision could create. When Marcus suggested offensive sets that had been successful in previous games, Reynolds dismissed them as playground basketball and insisted on more structured approaches that minimized Marcus's involvement in ball handling and decision-making. Roles. The game itself began. As Marcus expected, he scored Kentucky's first 8 points and assisted on the next 2 baskets, giving his team an early lead against a Duke squad that had been expected to dominate. But midway through the first half, despite Marcus's perfect shooting performance and obvious impact on the game, Coach Reynolds made a substitution that shocked everyone in Rupp Arena. He pulled Marcus from the game and inserted Jimmy Morrison, a white sophomore guard who was averaging 6 points per game and had struggled in previous contests. "Take a seat and watch how the game should be played," Reynolds told Marcus as he came to the bench, speaking loudly enough for other players and nearby spectators to hear. The comment was devastating, not just for its dismissive tone, but for its implication that Marcus's successful performance somehow represented inferior basketball compared to Morrison's less effective but apparently more appropriate style. Marcus sat on the bench for the remainder of the first half, watching Kentucky's lead evaporate as Duke's defense adjusted to Morrison's limited abilities. The television announcers expressed confusion about the substitution, noting that Kentucky's offense had been flowing smoothly with Marcus controlling the tempo. But Reynolds kept Marcus benched, offering no explanation to the media or to Marcus himself about the decision. During halftime, the confrontation escalated to a level that would define Marcus's relationship with the coaching staff for the remainder of his college career. In the locker room, Marcus approached Reynolds to ask about his playing time in the second half. "Coach, I was playing well out there. The team was moving the ball, and we had good shots. What do I need to do differently?" Reynolds's response revealed the racial dynamics that had been simmering beneath the surface of their interactions all season. "Washington, you think this is about individual statistics, but it's about playing the right way. Duke plays disciplined basketball. They don't rely on individual athleticism. They use intelligence and fundamentals. That's what we need to learn from them." The implication was clear and devastating. Marcus's athletic success was being characterized as inferior to the intelligent and fundamental approach that Reynolds associated with Duke's predominantly white players. This was a common racist trope in basketball, where black players' success was attributed to natural athleticism rather than intelligence, strategy, or skill development, while white players were credited with superior basketball IQ regardless of their actual performance. Marcus tried to respond respectfully, pointing out that his assists and decision-making had created opportunities for his teammates and that his driving ability had been opening up the Duke defense for easier shots by other players. "I've been moving the ball and getting guys open looks," he said. "My shooting percentage is good, and we were ahead when you took me out." But Reynolds wasn't interested in performance-based arguments. "That's exactly the attitude I'm talking about," he replied, his voice rising so that other players could hear. "You think basketball is about your individual numbers, but championship teams play as units. They don't rely on one player trying to take over the game with athleticism." This was when Reynolds delivered the line that would haunt Marcus for years. "You don't have what it takes to play at this level. Maybe you should focus on your books instead of pretending you belong on this court." The locker room fell silent. 20 other players, black and white, watched as their most talented teammate was publicly humiliated by a coach who seemed more interested in asserting racial hierarchy than winning basketball games. Several of Marcus's teammates later told him they were shocked by Reynolds's comments, but none felt comfortable challenging the coach in the moment. Marcus started the second half on the bench and remained there for the entire 20 minutes, watching Kentucky lose by 15 points as Morrison and the other substitutes struggled against Duke's pressure defense. The television cameras captured Marcus's expression during those final minutes, not angry or sulking, but calculating, as if he was processing something far more significant than a single basketball game. After the game, Reynolds told reporters that he was experimenting with different lineups and that some players need to learn that individual success doesn't always translate to team success. When asked specifically about Marcus's performance and limited playing time, Reynolds said, "Marcus has talent, but basketball is about more than athleticism. We're trying to teach our players to play the right way." The racial coding in Reynolds's language was obvious to anyone familiar with basketball discourse. Athleticism versus basketball IQ, individual play versus team basketball, and the right way were all phrases commonly used to diminish black players' contributions while elevating white players' perceived superior understanding of the game. That night, Marcus called his father and described what had happened. James Washington, who had faced similar discrimination during his own athletic career in the pre-integration era, recognized the patterns immediately. "Son," he said, "some people will never see past your skin color to recognize your abilities. Your job is to become so successful that they have to respect your achievements even if they don't respect you." The next morning, Marcus made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He would finish his degree at Kentucky, but he would also begin preparing for a career where he would have the power to prevent other talented athletes from experiencing the humiliation he had endured. Coach Reynolds had just created his own future boss, though it would take 30 years for that truth to become apparent. The aftermath of the Duke game marked the beginning of Marcus Washington's transformation from disappointed athlete to determined entrepreneur. For the remainder of his sophomore season, Coach Reynolds kept Marcus on the bench during crucial games while offering vague explanations about team chemistry and system fit that fooled no one familiar with basketball strategy. Marcus's statistics, when he did play, remained outstanding. He shot 58% from the field and led the team in assists per minute, but his playing time continued to decrease as the season progressed. The psychological impact was initially devastating. Marcus had built his identity around basketball excellence since childhood, and suddenly finding himself marginalized despite superior performance created a crisis of confidence that extended beyond sports. He began meeting with Dr. Angela Thompson, the university's counselor for student athletes, who helped him understand that his experience was part of a broader pattern of discrimination that affected black athletes across college sports. "What you're experiencing isn't about your abilities," Dr. Thompson explained during one of their sessions. "It's about a system that allows coaches to make subjective decisions based on racial bias while using objective-sounding language to justify those decisions. The question is, how will you respond to this injustice?" Marcus's response was comprehensive and strategic. Instead of transferring to another school, which would have required sitting out a season and potentially facing similar discrimination elsewhere, he chose to remain at Kentucky while developing skills and knowledge that would serve him in the business world. He changed his major to sports management and began studying the financial and operational aspects of college and professional athletics with the intensity he had once reserved for basketball training. During his junior year, Marcus started a tutoring service for student athletes, providing academic support while gaining experience in business operations and leadership. The venture was successful, both financially and socially. It gave Marcus a sense of purpose beyond basketball, while demonstrating his ability to build organizations and manage people effectively. More importantly, it connected him with other black athletes who were experiencing similar discrimination, but had fewer resources for addressing it. Through conversations with athletes from different sports, Marcus learned that his experience with Coach Reynolds was part of a systematic pattern affecting black student athletes across the university. Football players described being steered away from skill positions requiring decision-making. Track athletes reported receiving less coaching attention and scholarship support, and even tennis and golf players faced exclusion from social events and networking opportunities that were readily available to their white teammates. Marcus began documenting these incidents, creating a comprehensive record of discriminatory practices that he would later use to advocate for policy changes within the athletic department. He also started building relationships with successful black athletes who had graduated from Kentucky and gone on to careers in business, media, and professional sports. These mentors provided crucial guidance about navigating racial discrimination while building the skills and networks necessary for long-term success. His senior year brought a partial vindication when a new assistant coach, Robert Johnson, joined Reynolds' staff. Johnson, who was black and had played professionally overseas, immediately recognized Marcus's abilities and advocated for increased playing time. Under Johnson's influence, Marcus finally received consistent minutes and finished his college career with impressive statistics: 18 points per game, 7 assists, and 52% shooting from the field over his final season. But the damage to Marcus's professional basketball prospects had been done. NBA scouts had watched 3 years of inconsistent playing time and interpreted it as evidence that Marcus couldn't perform at the highest level, despite his impressive per-minute production. When he graduated in 1997, Marcus received interest from only a few European teams and minor league organizations rather than the NBA opportunities that his talent should have generated. Instead of pursuing a marginal professional playing career, Marcus made a decision that surprised many observers. He enrolled in Harvard Business School to earn an MBA with a focus on sports management and private equity. His thesis project analyzed the economic impact of discrimination in college basketball, documenting how racial bias in coaching decisions affected not just individual athletes, but also team performance and university revenue. The research was groundbreaking. Marcus demonstrated that teams with coaches who exhibited measurable bias in playing time, allocation, controlling for performance metrics, won fewer games and generated less television revenue than teams with more equitable coaching practices. The study attracted attention from sports journalists and academic researchers, establishing Marcus as an emerging expert on discrimination in athletics while building his credibility for future business ventures. During his MBA program, Marcus also began developing the network of relationships that would eventually enable him to pursue sports ownership. He studied with classmates who were entering investment banking, private equity, and corporate development roles, learning about capital, markets, and deal structures while maintaining his focus on the sports industry. He completed summer internships with Goldman Sachs and McKinsey & Company, gaining experience in financial analysis and strategic consulting that would prove crucial for his later ventures. Most importantly, Marcus's MBA years were when he developed his comprehensive strategy for addressing discrimination in sports through economic empowerment rather than just legal or political action. He understood that lasting change would require black professionals to gain ownership positions and decision-making authority within sports organizations, not just equal treatment as players or employees. His thesis advisor, Professor Michael Porter, encouraged Marcus to think systematically about how market forces could be leveraged to address social problems. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, Porter observed. It's economically inefficient. Organizations that allow bias to override merit in personnel decisions will eventually be outcompeted by those that don't. Your job is to accelerate that process by creating better alternatives. This insight became the foundation of Marcus's post-graduation career plan. He would work in private equity and investment banking to develop the financial expertise and capital necessary to eventually acquire ownership positions in professional sports franchises. The boy who had been benched for racial reasons would become the man who decided which coaches deserved opportunities to succeed. The pivotal moment arrived on a cold February morning in 2024, exactly 30 years after that humiliating Duke game. Marcus Washington, now 51, and managing partner of Washington Capital Partners, a $2.8 billion private equity firm specializing in sports and entertainment investments, received the call he had been preparing for his entire adult life. Marcus, this is David Sterling from Goldman Sachs. The voice on the phone carried barely contained excitement. The Charlotte Hornets ownership group is looking to sell. Michael Jordan wants out, and they need a lead investor who can close quickly with full financing. Given your portfolio and your background, you're at the top of their list. The irony was perfect and profound. Marcus's firm had spent the past decade acquiring minority stakes in professional sports franchises, while building the capital base and industry relationships necessary for a majority ownership opportunity. His portfolio included investments in NBA teams, soccer clubs, and media companies, generating returns that had made him one of the most successful black investors in sports history. But this was the moment he had been working toward since Coach Reynolds had told him he didn't belong on the basketball court. The financial analysis was complex, but achievable. The Hornets were valued at approximately $3.8 billion, requiring an investment that would represent the largest sports acquisition by a black majority owner in NBA history. Marcus's firm had liquid assets and credit facilities sufficient for the purchase, but more importantly, he had spent years building relationships with institutional investors, family offices, and sovereign wealth funds that would provide the additional capital needed for such a transformative transaction. That afternoon, Marcus flew to Charlotte for a preliminary meeting with Jordan and the ownership group. Walking through the Spectrum Center, he felt the surreal weight of returning to basketball, not as a marginalized player, but as a potential owner with the power to shape the culture and direction of an entire franchise. The arena was the same type of space where he had once been humiliated, but now he was entering it with the authority to determine how players would be treated and which coaches would be hired. The meeting with Jordan was particularly meaningful. The greatest basketball player in history had faced his own struggles with discrimination during his playing career and understood the significance of Marcus's potential ownership. "I've been watching your career," Jordan told him. "You've built something remarkable, and you understand both basketball and business in ways that most owners don't. This team needs someone who gets what players go through." But the most emotionally charged moment came when Marcus visited the University of Kentucky during his due diligence process for the Hornets purchase. The athletic director, now eager to associate the university with Marcus's success, arranged a tour of the updated basketball facilities and a meeting with current players. As Marcus walked through Rupp Arena, the same court where he had been benched 30 years earlier, he was accompanied by reporters and university officials who treated him with the deference due to someone worth over $400 million. During the tour, Marcus learned that Coach Tom Reynolds had been quietly forced out in 2018 after a series of racial discrimination complaints from players and their families. The coach who had once told Marcus he didn't belong had spent his final years fighting allegations that his personnel decisions were influenced by racial bias rather than basketball merit. Reynolds now worked as an assistant coach at a small Division II school. His career effectively ended by the same patterns of discrimination he had once perpetuated. The university's current basketball coach, Caleb Wilson, was a young black former player who had been hired as part of the athletic department's effort to address its history of racial bias. During their conversation, Wilson expressed admiration for Marcus's career and acknowledged the discrimination he had faced as a player. "I've heard the stories about what happened to you here," Wilson said. "I want you to know that things have changed, and your success has been part of forcing those changes." Marcus's response was gracious, but pointed. Change happens when people in positions of power decide that discrimination is not just morally wrong, but bad for business. "I'm grateful that players today have better opportunities than I did, but the work isn't finished." The Hornets purchase negotiations concluded successfully in March 2024. Marcus's ownership group completed the acquisition for $3.9 billion, making him the second black majority owner in NBA history and the youngest majority owner in the league at 51 years old. The transaction was financed through a combination of Marcus's private equity firm, institutional investors, and family offices that had been impressed by his track record in sports investments. But the most satisfying aspect of the ownership wasn't the financial achievement. It was the power to ensure that no talented player would ever again be marginalized by coaches who allowed racial bias to override basketball merit. Marcus had transformed his humiliation into empowerment, his discrimination into economic opportunity, and his benching into ownership. 1 year after acquiring the Charlotte Hornets, Marcus Washington had transformed both the organization's culture and its performance in ways that validated his 3-decade journey from benchwarmer to owner. His first major decision was hiring Keisha Johnson as the team's general manager, making her the first Black woman to hold that position in NBA history, and signaling his commitment to creating opportunities for underrepresented talent at every level of the organization. Under Marcus's ownership, the Hornets implemented comprehensive bias training for all coaching staff and front office personnel, established clear metrics for evaluating player performance that eliminated subjective assessments, and created mentorship programs connecting current players with Black business leaders and entrepreneurs. The team's win-loss record improved dramatically, but more importantly, player satisfaction and retention rates reached league-leading levels. The franchise's community impact extended far beyond basketball. Marcus established the Washington Foundation for Athletic Equity, a nonprofit organization providing scholarships, business training, and legal support for young athletes facing discrimination in high school and college sports. The Foundation's first initiative was a partnership with universities across the Southeast to implement bias monitoring systems that would identify and address discriminatory coaching practices before they could derail promising careers. Perhaps the most meaningful aspect of the Foundation's work was its documentation of ongoing discrimination patterns in college athletics. Research funded by Marcus's organization revealed that Black athletes at the Division I level faced systematic bias in playing time allocation, position assignments, and post-graduation opportunities that cost them millions in potential earnings and professional development. The data became impossible for athletic directors and university administrators to ignore, leading to policy changes at dozens of institutions. The transformation also reached back to Marcus's alma mater. When the University of Kentucky requested a substantial donation for their athletics program, Marcus agreed on the condition that the university establish an endowment for studying and addressing racial discrimination in college sports. The Marcus Washington Center for Athletic Equity, funded with $50 million from his foundation, became a national research hub for understanding and eliminating bias in collegiate athletics. But perhaps the most satisfying resolution came when Tom Reynolds, the coach who had benched Marcus 30 years earlier, requested a meeting through intermediaries. Now 73 and battling early-stage dementia, Reynolds wanted to apologize for his treatment of Marcus and other Black players during his coaching career. The meeting took place in Charlotte, with Reynolds' son present to help facilitate the conversation. "I know I made mistakes," Reynolds said, his once commanding voice now frail and uncertain. "I let my prejudices affect my coaching decisions, and I hurt players who deserved better. You were one of the most talented players I ever coached, and I failed you." Marcus's response was both forgiving and educational. "Coach, I appreciate your apology, but the important thing now is making sure other players don't face what I experienced. Your decisions affected more than just my college career. They shaped how I understood the need for systemic change in sports." The conversation led to an unexpected outcome. Reynolds agreed to participate in the Washington Foundation's bias training programs, sharing his story with current coaches as an example of how unconscious prejudice could undermine both individual careers and team success. His willingness to acknowledge past mistakes and educate others became a model for addressing institutional discrimination in athletics. By 2025, Marcus's approach to sports ownership had attracted attention from business schools, civil rights organizations, and other professional leagues. The Hornets' success, both financially and culturally, demonstrated that addressing discrimination wasn't just morally necessary, but economically advantageous. Teams that created inclusive environments consistently outperformed those that maintained exclusionary practices. Validation that Marcus had been right to view bias as a business problem with business solutions. The impact extended beyond the NBA. Marcus's success encouraged other Black entrepreneurs to pursue sports ownership opportunities, while his documented methods for eliminating bias provided templates for creating more equitable athletic environments. Young athletes across the country now had evidence that discrimination, while still present, could be overcome through strategic thinking, comprehensive preparation, and economic empowerment. Most importantly, Marcus had created systems that would outlast his individual ownership. The policies, training programs, and research initiatives established during his tenure as Hornets owner became models adopted by other franchises, ensuring that his influence on athletic equity would continue regardless of his personal involvement. With any specific team, Marcus Washington's journey from benched college player to NBA team owner represents more than just personal triumph. It's a blueprint for how systemic discrimination can be transformed into institutional change through strategic economic empowerment. When Coach Tom Reynolds told a talented young athlete that he didn't belong on the basketball court, he inadvertently created the very force that would eventually revolutionize how bias operates in professional sports. The story illuminates a crucial truth about discrimination in athletics. It's not just morally wrong, it's competitively destructive. Teams that allow racial bias to override talent evaluation consistently underperform compared to organizations that prioritize merit over prejudice. Marcus's success as an owner, both financially and culturally, proves that addressing discrimination isn't just about fairness, it's about winning. His approach offers a powerful model for responding to institutional bias. Instead of simply fighting individual instances of discrimination, Marcus built systems that made equality economically advantageous. Instead of seeking revenge against those who had wronged him, he created opportunities for education and redemption. Instead of abandoning basketball after being marginalized, he returned with the power to ensure that future generations of athletes would face more equitable treatment. Today, when talented young athletes face discrimination from coaches, recruiters, or administrators, they have more than just legal recourse or social activism. They have a roadmap for building the economic power necessary to transform entire systems, not just individual attitudes. The Washington Foundation's work continues expanding, but its core message remains clear. Talent transcends race, merit defeats prejudice. And sometimes the most profound response to being told you don't belong isn't proving them wrong. It's buying the building and changing. Who gets to decide who belongs? The boy who was benched for his race became the man who ensures that benching decisions are based solely on basketball ability, proving that the arc of sports justice, while long, can bend toward equity when guided by strategic vision and sustained commitment.